What's up, YouTube? Capital G here, showing you guys this Chaos Red Eyes build that actually topped in the OCG, and I find this to be really fascinating because you guys all know, in fact, everybody knows, even casual players, that at this point, the Zodiac beasts have just taken over the OCG. It is their playground, and they are dominating. They are smothering out every other deck, except maybe Win-Witch Eidolon Artifact, but that's a deck that was pretty much built entirely to hard counter them, and when you have 90% of the meta, this is kind of the stuff that starts popping up, guys. It's kind of like Teledad formats a long time ago in the TCG, where when you have a deck that is so much of the meta, it seems like everything else is pretty much built in mind to hard counter that deck. Now, I will say outright, this was a small event. It was only like 60 people, but that's actually not that small in the OCG. And a lot of events in Japan and stuff, guys, they don't get to the YCS level. They don't get to like 15, 1600 people. A lot of them get to maybe 200, 300 tops, and those are usually big events that only happen a couple of times a year. And also, this deck is not going to be applicable to the TCG for obvious reasons. Mainly just, it's not that we don't have these cards, it's just the ban list dictates that we just won't be able to play a lot of these cards at the certain ratios that this guy played it. And to get the maximum success that you would need for this deck, you would need to be able to play 3 copies of Skill Drain when we're only allowed to play 1. Unless something changes over the next ban list that I obviously just can't foresee. Now, this deck is kind of reminiscent of Chaos Dragons. I don't know if how many of you guys remember that deck where you'd have like Future Fusion. In fact, it was the reason that Future Fusion got banned. And you guys probably have not seen Light Pulsar Dragon played competitively in a very long time. This card was used a lot of times in conjunction with Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon. It actually was like a little bit of a soft loop where Light Pulsar would die and it would bring back Red Eyes, and then you would use Red Eyes' effect to bring back Light Pulsar, and then, you know, if Red Eyes died, you just be able to bring it back with Light Pulsar again, or if your opponent didn't kill the Red Eyes, you would generally be able to just overwhelm them. And keep in mind, this was way before things like Castel or Utopia the Lightning or Solemn Strike existed. So as easy as it sounds to just counter that, like, it wasn't as easy as you would think. And this deck does kind of fundamentally work on the same concept that Chaos Dragons ran off of. Basically summon a bunch of big ass dragon beaters, beat the fuck out of your opponent, and if those dragon beaters die, then those dragon beaters should be able to fuel your chaos summons. Now, having 2 BLS in the OCG, I would imagine, is strong as fuck, because BLS is still a card that I don't think has actually been power creeped. In addition, you still have just a lot of good dragon monsters that are searchable because of Red Eyes Insight. This card being able to search Red Eyes Fusion is super important, because Red Eyes Fusion, when you resolve it, not only does it give you a huge beater, assuming that this isn't like, you know, Solemn or something like that, but it puts Light Pulsar Dragon in the graveyard immediately so that he can kind of be online. You can special summon him from the graveyard, or you can use him to summon like a Blackluster Soldier if you think, you know, like you need to banish a monster or something like that. Now, if you look at the trap lineup, it's obvious why this guy had any level of success. I mean, this is like the most anti-Zodiac Beast trap lineup I've ever seen, with the exception of like the 4 Call to Haunted. I'm gonna call Red Eye Spirit a Call to Haunted because that's basically all it does here. You see he's playing the artifacts, and the artifacts are starting to become like probably the second hardest counter to Zodiac Beast. Obviously, the first is just Dimensional Barrier, which every deck in Japan pretty much runs. They just a lot of times call Xyz. And what's cool about this deck is, even if your opponent calls Fusion, I believe these cards should go to the graveyard if you're activating Red Eyes Fusion, which can be important because if you send a Light Pulsar to the graveyard, I mean, it's not like you can't just call up the Haunted it back. Or if you send a Red Eyes to the graveyard, you can still use things like Red Eye Spirit. But in addition to that, guys, like 3 copies of Skill Drain, like, oh my god, Craigasm. This is the bane of a deck like Zodiac Beast, and I really do wish that we had Skill Drain at 3 in the OC or in the TCG, because maybe I wouldn't be so afraid of Zodiac Beast. But when you can summon these big ass beat sticks, you know, 3,500, 2,500, 3,000 from a BLS, 28 from a Metal Dragon, or I mean, even just like 2,400 from a Flare Dragon, your opponent's gonna have a serious fucking problem trying to get over these things with Zodiac Beast if they can't use any effects. Keep in mind, guys, all the Zodiac Beast Xyz, they all have 0 attack and 0 defense. So what are you gonna do when I have a 3,500 attack monster and you've got a bunch of like little weenie ass mole rats and, you know, Xyz that have 0 attack? You also combine that with the fact that, again, he is running the artifacts, a couple of Sanctums, or excuse me, a trio of Sanctums, a couple copies of Scythe. I think maybe he could have ran 3 copies of Scythe, because he is running double Desires, and I do think there's a possibility that he could actually end up banishing both copies of, he could end up banishing both copies of artifacts, of Artifact Scythe. But I think that's the reason why he ran Twin Twisters instead of Cosmic Cyclone. If you guys have not noticed, in the OCG, most players, like most Zodiac Beast players, they do not run Twin Twister anymore. And the reason that they don't is because they're pretty much, they realize that at this point, everybody is playing artifacts to try and hard counter them. And it goes without saying, like, you don't want to be blind MSTing and hitting, like an Artifact Scythe or something like that. You might end up losing the duel because of that, because you go like super neg, your opponent gets a monster, you can't go into your extra deck, and just hitting things like Artifact Sanctum, this type of shit can end up losing you the game. But he's free to play Twin Twister, because if he hits a Scythe, it's not gonna really do much to his deck. Like, his deck can still revolve around, like, let's say he's playing against Wind Witch Eidolon Artifacts, right? Even if he can't go into the extra deck because he ended up Twin Twistering his opponent's Scythe, like, he can still just drop BLS, flip over Skill Drain, and just call it a day. Like, he can play vanilla Beatdown, which obviously this deck excels at, and that can just kind of be his win condition. But opposing players can't do that to him because they have to fear the Sanctum. They have to fear, hitting an Artifact Scythe. So a lot of people have pretty much dropped Twin Twister, and you could potentially see a bunch of like dead cards. Like, maybe he has 2 copies of Red Eyes Fusion in his opening hand. Obviously, this is a card that you can only activate once per turn. Same thing goes for Red Eyes Insight. So when you have a bunch of cards, Pot of Desires, you can throw that in the mix of another card that can only be activated once per turn. These are good cards to try and just get rid of back row, like try and get rid of just annoying ass cards. Torrential Tribute being at 3, oh my god, I would really like if they did some of this stuff in the TCG. I remember playing during the Zexil era when Torrential Tribute was at 2. It was one of the most fun formats I ever remembered, because you always felt scared to summon a monster because you just were like, you got that Torrential though? You know what I mean? Like, you never wanted to summon more than 2 monsters on the field at any time. This is another card that just hard counters Zodiac Beasts. Like, as soon as they summon Malmarat off of Triangle, or whether they normal summon it, you immediately Torrential them. They never get to go into their extra deck. And I just think this is pretty interesting, but I cross my fingers and I really hope this is not what the TCG becomes. But it wouldn't surprise me, like, if Konami releases a ban list right before mid-February, or maybe they make it go into effect mid-February, right before Raging Tempest comes out, we could be seeing something like this, guys. We could see some decks like maybe Paleozoics get hit on the ban list, or Metaphors, and then Zodiac Beasts they get so much better than what they already would have become, and they become like the definitive like tier 0 deck, and a lot of the decks in the format are just playing to like hard counter them. Also, last thing, you notice that he's not playing like any strikes or anything like that. You don't need strikes in a deck like this. Like, if you're flipping over things like Skill Drain, or you have like Torrential plus like Dimensional Barrier, you don't really need to play strikes. Like, keep your life points. Skill Drain is the only card that you have to think about it like this. If your opponent has a Malmarat and they're gonna go into, I don't know, Tigress or something like that, Bullhorn, like, would you rather have Strike and just deal with that one monster right then and there for 1500, or would you rather flip over Skill Drain and know that like the rest of their deck doesn't do anything for 1000 life points? You know what I mean? Like, Skill Drain kind of solves the problem of Zodiac Beasts permanently until they are able to get like the Cosmic Cyclone or somehow out this, when Solemn Strike only deals with like one card, or it deals with like one summon. It's not like they're gonna Pendulum summon or anything like that. So, when you're not playing against like a lot of Pendulum decks, Solemn Strike isn't necessarily as important. But we don't have this level of floodgates in the TCG, unless Konami does us a solid and put Skill Drain to 3. But I just wanted to show you guys this deck. Anytime there's something that does top in the OCG that isn't Zodiac Beast, I might end up covering it. But again, this is not applicable right now to the TCG, obviously, because we don't have 2 BLSs, we don't have 3 Maxis, we don't have 3 Skill Drains, and we definitely don't have 3 Torrential Tributes. But who knows, maybe we'll see 2 Torrential Tributes in the future. I guess I'll talk about that on my ban list prediction video. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed the video, if you like Red Eyes, give the video a thumbs up. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think that decks like this in the future will become more prominent in the OCG? I think that definitely is going to be what happens. Like, every deck is just going to start running a ton of traps to just try and counter Zodiac Beast, to try and put a dent in the dominance of that deck. If you guys enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already. Also, if anybody can tell me, because for the life of me, I could not figure this out, why he's running Dante, the Xyz monster, in this extra deck, because there are no level 3 monsters, so I don't think that he has any way of actually summoning this card. And I understand why he runs Beatrice, because obviously like Pulsar is level 6. If you have double like Pulsar, you can go into like Beatrice or whatever. And I thought that like maybe, I was like, maybe he wants to summon it off of Beatrice, but like why wouldn't you just run the fusion Dante, like Dante Pilgrim? It just seems like it would have made a lot more sense. So maybe you guys can figure it out, because I couldn't figure it out. And also, I'm not saying that, oh my god, this deck is going to be tier 0 or anything like that. It's just something interesting that wasn't Zodiac Beast, which is why I talked about it.